The alarm rang through the training hall on Creo 7 station, and 6 recruits stood at attention. Their instructor, a massive Velhari warrior named Commander Vorik, watched them with 3 eyes that showed nothing but disappointment. "Failed again," Vorik said, his voice deep and rumbling. "That makes 37 consecutive failures." Tay, the squad leader, kept his posture perfect, even as shame burned through him. Behind him, his team stood just as straight. Hyan, their marksman. Yuri, their tactician. Mira, their heavy weapons specialist. Jin, their scout. And Day, their pilot. All of them were young Velhari, members of a proud warrior race known across the galaxy for their strength and combat skills. But somehow, they couldn't pass a single exercise. The simulation had been simple enough. Rescue hostages from a building held by enemy forces. Their instructors had run this exercise with hundreds of cohorts before. Most passed on the 2nd or 3rd attempt. Cohort 47 Delta, called the Cubs by other recruits, had now failed it 17 times. "We followed the doctrine exactly," Tay said quietly, trying to understand. "Every movement was precise. Every formation was correct." "That's the problem," Vorik replied, though he sounded more confused than angry. "You do everything right. Your form is perfect. Your timing is exact. But you still fail." It was true. The Cubs trained harder than any other cohort. They studied every manual, memorized every regulation, and practiced until their muscles ached. Hyan could recite the proper stance for 40 different shooting positions. Yuri knew every tactical formation used in the last 1,000 years of Velhari military history. Mira could field strip her weapon blindfolded. Jin could track footprints across bare metal. They knew every control in his spacecraft by heart. None of it mattered. They still failed. Other recruits whispered about them in the mess hall. Some laughed. Others felt sorry for them. The Cubs were becoming famous across the station, but for all the wrong reasons. Instructors from other species would shake their heads when they passed. The Velhari commanders met in private rooms, discussing what to do with this embarrassing cohort. After the debriefing, the Cubs walked back to their barracks in silence. They passed other cohorts celebrating their victories, and the contrast felt like a knife. Tay wanted to say something encouraging to his team, but what could he say? That they would do better next time? They'd been saying that for 3 months. In the barracks, Mira threw her equipment on her bunk harder than necessary. "I don't understand. We're doing everything the instructors teach us." "Maybe that's not enough," Yuri said quietly. She was looking at her tactical datapad, studying the simulation replay for the 100th time. "We arrived at the building at the correct time. We breached the door using proper formation. We cleared each room according to protocol. But the enemies always knew where we would be, because we followed the doctrine," Jin said, his voice thoughtful. "We did exactly what the manual says to do." "The manual has worked for 1,000 years, Hyan protested. "Our ancestors used these same tactics to conquer our homeworld." "Our homeworld," they repeated. "Where everyone fought like us. Where everyone was Velhari." The room fell silent. It was a truth they hadn't wanted to face. Everything they'd been taught assumed they would fight against enemies who thought like them, moved like them, and followed similar rules of warfare. But the galaxy was bigger than their homeworld. The enemies in these simulations were different species with different tactics, and the Cubs kept treating every battle like a traditional Velhari duel. That evening, Tay received a message from the Academy Command. He was to report to the administration building immediately. His stomach dropped. This was it. They were going to disband the cohort and send them home in disgrace. When he arrived, he found Commander Vorak and 2 other senior instructors waiting. But there was someone else too. A human. She was short by Velhari standards, barely reaching Tay's chest. She had dark hair tied back carelessly, and she was drinking something from a container that smelled bitter and strong. She wore casual clothes, not a proper uniform, and she was sitting on the edge of the desk like she owned the place. "Instructor Tay," Varric said formally. "This is Instructor Rin. She's from Earth. Recently assigned to our station as part of the cultural exchange program." Rin raised her container in greeting, which seemed incredibly informal for a military setting. "Heard you and your team have been having some trouble. We've failed to meet standards," Tay admitted, keeping his voice level. "I've been reviewing your simulation records," Rin said, setting down her drink. "You know what I see? I see a team that does everything perfectly and still loses. That's actually kind of impressive in a weird way." Tay didn't know how to respond to that. Rin stood and walked closer, looking up at him with eyes that seemed amused rather than disappointed. "Your commanders want to disband your cohort. I told them to give me 2 weeks with you first." "2 weeks?" Tay repeated. "2 weeks to teach you how humans fight," Rin said, her smile growing wider. "Because let me tell you something about my species. We weren't the strongest. We weren't the fastest. We weren't apex predators like you. But we survived, and we learned how to win battles we had no business winning. Want to know how?" Tay found himself nodding despite his confusion. "We stopped fighting fair," Rin said simply. "We got creative, we got clever, and we got just a little bit crazy. Your problem isn't that you're bad soldiers. Your problem is that you're too good at being predictable." She picked up her drink again. "So here's what we're going to do. For the next 2 weeks, you're going to forget everything your Velhari instructors taught you. And you're going to learn the Earthborn way." Commander Vorak made a noise that might have been protest, but one of the other instructors silenced him with a gesture. "Report to Training Hall 7 tomorrow at dawn," Rin continued. "And Tay? Tell your team to bring an open mind. They're going to need it." As Tay left the building, his head was spinning. Forget everything they'd learned? Fight like humans instead of Velhari? It sounded insane, but they'd already tried doing things the proper way. Maybe insane was exactly what they needed. Training Hall 7 was smaller than the main facilities, tucked away in a corner of the station that most recruits never visited. When the Cubs arrived at dawn, they found Instructor Rin already there, sitting cross-legged on the floor with that same bitter-smelling drink in her hand. She wasn't wearing exercise clothes or armor, just simple pants and a shirt that said something in human writing across the front. The Cubs stood at attention, waiting for orders. Rin looked at them and laughed. "First lesson," she said, not bothering to stand. "Stop doing that. You're not on parade ground. Relax." Tay glanced at his team, uncertain. Relaxing during training felt wrong. But slowly, they shifted their stances, trying to look less formal. "Better," Rin said, finally getting to her feet. "Now, let me ask you something. Why do you think you keep failing?" "We don't know," Yuri admitted. "We follow every regulation. We execute every movement correctly." "Exactly," Rin said, pointing at her. "You follow regulations. You execute movements. You're fighting like robots, not warriors. The enemies in those simulations aren't following your Velhari rulebook. They're adapting, reacting, and doing unexpected things. Meanwhile, you're doing exactly what the manual says, which makes you incredibly easy to predict." She walked over to where their training weapons were stored and picked up a practice rifle. Take Hyan, for example. You're a marksman. I watched his simulation footage. His shooting stance is perfect. Textbook form. But you know what? That textbook was written for shooting on your high-gravity homeworld, standing on solid ground with time to line up your shot. What happens when you're running? Or falling? Or hanging upside down from a ceiling? Hyan's mandibles clicked with discomfort. That would be improper form. The accuracy would suffer. Of course it would suffer, Rin agreed. But sometimes a quick shot with bad form is better than a perfect shot that comes too late. She tossed the rifle to Hyan, who caught it smoothly. In a real battle, the enemy isn't going to wait for you to get into proper stance. They're going to shoot you while you're still positioning your feet. She turned to face all of them. Here's the thing about humans. We came from a world where almost everything was bigger and stronger than us. We had predators with sharper claws, faster legs, better senses. We should have died out. But we didn't, because we learned to think differently. We used tools. We set traps. We worked together in ways those predators couldn't predict. We survived by being unpredictable, creative, and adaptable. Myra spoke up, her voice uncertain. But the Velhari doctrine has been refined for centuries. It's proven effective. Against other Velhari, sure, Rin said. But you're training for a galactic military force. You'll face enemies who don't know or care about your doctrine. Some species fight in 3 dimensions because they can fly. Some can see in darkness or sense heat. Some are so small they can hide in places you'd never think to look. Your doctrine doesn't account for any of that because it was designed for traditional warfare on your homeworld. She walked to the center of the room. So here's what we're going to do. For the next 2 weeks, you're going to unlearn everything that makes you predictable. You're going to practice fighting in ways that feel wrong and uncomfortable. You're going to break rules, improvise, and most importantly, you're going to stop announcing your intentions. Announcing our intentions? Tay asked, confused. Rin nodded. In your last simulation, I counted 43 times your team communicated over your squad channel. Clear, proper military communications, which the enemy AI was listening to the entire time. They knew exactly what you were going to do before you did it. The cubs stared at her in shock. It had never occurred to them that the enemy might hear their communications. Humans learned early on that sometimes silence is better than communication, Rin continued. Sometimes a gesture or a glance tells your teammate everything they need to know without alerting the enemy. Your Velhari doctrine emphasizes clear verbal commands because that's what works when everyone's wearing full armor on a noisy battlefield. But these simulations aren't that kind of battle. She clapped her hands together. All right, enough talk. Let's start with something simple. Hyan, I want you to hit that target. She pointed to a mark on the far wall. But here's the catch. You have to do it while running, and you only get 1 second to aim. Hyan looked at the target, calculated the distance, and shook his head. That's impossible with proper form. Then, use improper form, Rin said with a grin. Go. Hyan ran, raised the practice rifle, and tried to aim while his body was moving. The shot went wide, missing by a considerable margin. He stopped, frustrated. Again, Rin called. And this time, don't think about proper stance. Just point and shoot like you're throwing something. They spent the next hour drilling this way. Hyan ran and shot over and over. At first, every shot missed. But gradually, something started to change. He stopped trying to force his body into the correct stance and started just reacting. His shots got closer to the target. Then one hit. There! Rin shouted. That's what I'm talking about. You stopped thinking and started feeling. Next, she worked with Yuri. You're a tactician, right? You make plans. How many backup plans do you usually prepare? 3, Yuri answered. 1 primary plan and 2 contingencies. Good. Now forget all of them. Yuri's eyes widened. Forget them? Make a plan, then be ready to throw it away the moment something unexpected happens, Rin explained. The best human tacticians I knew could make a plan, see it fail, and come up with something completely different in seconds. Your problem is that when your plan fails, you stick to it anyway because deviating feels wrong. She set up a tactical simulation, a simple one with moving targets and obstacles. Make your plan, execute it, but the moment something goes wrong, I want you to improvise something crazy. Don't fall back to contingency plan B, make up plan Z on the spot. Yuri tried. Her careful, calculated mind struggled with the concept of abandoning preparation. But after several attempts, she managed to improvise when her planned route got blocked. The new route she chose made no tactical sense according to her training, but it worked. For Mira, Rin changed how she thought about heavy weapons. You're calculating every shot, running the math for optimal damage. Stop. Sometimes you don't shoot to destroy. Sometimes you shoot to create cover or make noise or scare the enemy into moving where you want them. Jim learned to look for what wasn't there instead of what was. Empty streets mean someone cleared them out. Silent sectors mean someone's hiding. You're tracking what you can see, but humans learned to track what we couldn't see. They got the strangest lesson. Fly wrong. Fly drunk. Be erratic and unpredictable. A perfect flight path is easy to predict and easy to shoot down. The first day was exhausting and frustrating. Everything Rin taught them felt wrong, improper, and inefficient. The Cubs made mistake after mistake, failing drills they should have passed easily. But as they left the training hall that evening, Tay noticed something. For the first time in months, his team was actually talking about tactics with excitement instead of dread. They were discussing the training, arguing about techniques, and even laughing at their mistakes. Maybe the human way wasn't so crazy after all, or maybe it was exactly the right kind of crazy. By the 5th day of training, other cohorts had started to notice that something strange was happening in Training Hall 7. Recruits would peek through the windows and see the Cubs doing drills that looked completely wrong by every military standard. They saw high-end shooting while sliding across the floor. They saw Yuri abandoning cover for no apparent reason. They saw Myra using her heavy weapon to knock down walls instead of shooting through them. The rumors spread fast. Some said the human instructor was making the Cubs worse. Others said she was teaching them forbidden techniques. A few wondered if humans were just naturally crazy. Rin didn't care about the rumors. She kept pushing the Cubs harder each day, breaking down their trained responses and building something new. Something unpredictable. Today we're doing your first real simulation under my rules, Rin announced on day 6. It's the same hostage rescue you've failed before, but this time you're going to do it the human way. The Cubs stood in the simulation chamber, waiting for it to start. Tay felt nervous in a way he hadn't before. Following the doctrine had been comfortable, even when it led to failure. At least he'd known what to do. Now, Rin was asking them to improvise, to break rules, to fight in ways that felt wrong. The simulation began. The building materialized around them, and the enemy positions lit up on their tactical displays just like before. Remember, Rin's voice came through their earpieces. The enemy expects you to breach the front door in formation. So don't. Tay looked at his team. Under the old doctrine, he would have issued clear orders for their approach. Now, he just met their eyes and saw understanding there. They'd spent enough time training together this week to know what each other was thinking. Jin moved first, not to the front entrance, but to a side wall. He placed a breaching charge in a spot that wasn't a door or window, just a random section of wall. The explosion created an opening where the enemy wasn't expecting one. They poured through, not in proper formation, but scattered and moving fast. The enemy AI, programmed to expect standard tactics, hesitated for a crucial second. Hyan didn't wait to set up a proper shooting position. He fired while running, shots that would have made his old instructors wince. But 3 enemies went down before they could react. Yuri's careful plan lasted about 30 seconds before an enemy appeared in an unexpected position. Instead of falling back to contingency plan B like she'd been trained, she made a snap decision. Myra, collapse that wall. Now, Myra didn't calculate the optimal angle or the proper amount of explosive. She just aimed at the wall's weak point and fired. The wall came down, blocking the enemy's advance and creating new cover. They moved through the building like chaos incarnate. Day brought his support craft in through a window no one thought was large enough, flying erratically to avoid enemy fire. Jin found the hostages by looking at where guards weren't patrolling, assuming that meant something valuable was hidden there. When they finally extracted the hostages and exited the building, the simulation ended. Failed. The cubs stood frozen, waiting for the assessment. They'd lost, but somehow it felt different this time. Rin's voice came through the speakers, and she was laughing. You failed. But did you see your time? You lasted 3 times longer than your best previous attempt. You actually adapted when things went wrong. You survived situations that killed you instantly before. The simulation reset. Again, Rin commanded. This time, trust your instincts even more. They ran the simulation 5 more times that day. Failed 4 of them. But each failure was different. Each attempt lasted longer, and each time they tried something new. On the 6th attempt, they actually rescued the hostages and made it halfway to extraction before enemy reinforcements overwhelmed them. Progress. That night, word reached Commander Vorak about what was happening in the simulations. It came too. Observed the next day's training, his 3 eyes watching with an expression that was hard to read. Rin was teaching them about psychological warfare when Vorak arrived. Humans learned that sometimes the battle is won before the first shot, she explained. You make noise in one direction while attacking from another. You leave false trails. You make the enemy think you're retreating when you're actually flanking. It's not about strength. It's about making your enemy react to ghosts while you hit them where they're not looking. This is dishonorable, one of the watching Valhari instructors muttered. Rin heard him and turned. Honor doesn't mean much when you're dead. In a real battle, your enemy won't care about honor either. They'll care about winning. I'm teaching these recruits how to survive long enough to protect the people who depend on them. That's the only honor that matters. Vorak said nothing, but he kept watching. For the next several days, Rin introduced more concepts that felt alien to Valhari thinking. She taught them about ambush tactics, where you hide and wait instead of meeting the enemy head-on. She showed them how to use the environment as a weapon, collapsing ceilings or flooding rooms. She explained false retreats, where you run away to lure the enemy into a trap. Everything you learned about Valhari warfare assumed you were fighting an honorable duel, Rin said. But the galaxy doesn't work like duels. Real combat is messy, unfair, and chaotic. The side that wins is usually the side that's better at being unpredictable. She made them practice fighting in ways that felt cowardly by Valhari standards. Hiding, retreating, using cover instead of standing firm. Shooting enemies from behind instead of facing them directly. There's a human saying, Rin told them. It's better to be a live coward than a dead hero. Your culture values warriors who die gloriously in battle. Human culture values warriors who survive to protect their people. Both have merit, but only one keeps you alive. On day 10, something clicked. They were running another hostage simulation, and everything went wrong halfway through. An unexpected enemy patrol. A blocked escape route. The tactical plan falling apart. Tay didn't freeze. Didn't retreat to protocol. He just growled one word. Hunt. It was instinct, not doctrine. And his team understood. They stopped fighting like soldiers and started fighting like the predators their species had evolved from. But with a twist, they used human cunning alongside Valhari strength. They split up without orders, each finding their own path. They communicated with gestures and clicks instead of words. They used every dirty trick Rin had taught them. Hyan took impossible shots and made them work. Yuri abandoned her plan and improvised something brilliant. Mira used her weapon to create chaos instead of just destroying things. Jin tracked the enemy by watching where shadows fell wrong. Day flew his craft like it was broken, impossible to predict or target. When the simulation ended, they'd won. Barely, messily, but they'd won. The chamber fell silent. Then Rin's voice came through, filled with satisfaction. Now you're getting it. You stopped trying to be perfect. You started trying to survive. And that made you dangerous. Commander Varak left without a word, but Tay saw something in his expression that might have been approval. Or maybe shock. That night, the Cubs gathered in their barracks, exhausted but energized. For the first time since arriving at the academy, they felt like real warriors instead of failures. We're thinking like humans now, they said, sounding amazed. No, Yuri corrected, studying her tactical notes. We're thinking like Velhari, who learned from humans. We're using our strength and their cunning together. Tay looked at his team and felt something he hadn't felt in months. Pride. And hoped that they had 4 more days until the final trial. 4 more days to master this strange new way of fighting. 4 more days to become legends. News traveled fast through Creo 7 station. By day 12, everyone had heard that the Cubs, the cohort that failed everything, were suddenly passing simulations. Not just passing, excelling. Other instructors came to watch their training sessions. Recruits from different species would crowd around the observation windows, trying to understand what had changed. The academy commanders were confused and concerned in equal measure. The tactics the Cubs now used violated several traditional warfare principles. But the results were undeniable. Commander Vorak called a private meeting with Rin on day 13. What have you done to them? He asked, his 3 eyes focused on her intently. Rin sipped her coffee, unbothered by his tone. I taught them to think instead of just follow. To adapt instead of just execute. To survive instead of just fight honorably. They fight like... Vorak struggled for words. Like prey animals. Hiding, ambushing, retreating. It's not the Velhari way. No, it's the human way, Rin agreed. And it works. Your Velhari way produces excellent soldiers for Velhari conflicts. But you're training them for a galactic defense force. They need to be ready for anything, not just traditional warfare. Vorak was silent for a long moment. The final trial is scheduled for tomorrow. The commanders moved it up. They want to see if this is real or just luck. Rin smiled. They're ready? The final trial was legendary throughout the academy. It was a zero-visibility urban combat scenario designed to be nearly impossible. Candidates had to rescue multiple hostages from a city occupied by superior enemy forces, all while dealing with smoke, darkness, and constant surprises. The enemy AI was the most advanced in the galactic military, capable of learning and adapting to tactics in real time. No cohort had achieved perfect marks on the final trial in 15 years. Most cohorts barely passed. Some failed it multiple times before succeeding. The Cubs had one chance. That evening, Rin gathered her team in Training Hall 7 one last time. They sat on the floor in a circle, informal and comfortable in a way that would have been unthinkable 3 weeks ago. I'm not going to give you a big speech, Rin said. You know what you need to do. But I want you to remember something. Tomorrow, that simulation is going to throw everything at you. Things will go wrong. Your plan will fall apart. You'll face situations you never trained for. She looked at each of them in turn. When that happens, don't panic. Don't retreat to old habits. Remember what I taught you. The enemy expects you to follow doctrine. So improvise. They expect you to fight fair. So don't. They expect you to break when things go wrong. She smiled. So when things go wrong, and they will get creative. Get clever. They're a little bit crazy. Tay met her eyes. We won't disappoint you. You couldn't disappoint me if you tried, Rin said. 3 weeks ago, you were failing because you were trying too hard to be perfect. Now you're succeeding because you're trying to win. That's all I ever wanted. The next morning, the observation deck was packed. Instructors from every species represented at the academy had come to watch. The story of the cubs and their human instructor had spread beyond Creo 7. Some came to see if the rumors were true. Others came hoping to learn. A few came expecting to see the cubs fail spectacularly. The cubs entered the simulation chamber in silence. No formal marching. No rigid positions. They looked relaxed, almost casual. It made the observers uncomfortable. Velhari warriors should be serious, focused, displaying proper military bearing. These 6 looked like they were going for a walk. The simulation began. Darkness fell instantly, broken only by emergency lights that barely pushed back the shadows. Smoke filled the streets, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The city materialized around them. A maze of buildings and alleyways dot, and somewhere in that chaos were hostages who needed rescue. Tay didn't issue orders. He clicked his mandibles once a signal they'd developed during training. The team scattered immediately, each moving to different positions. No formation. No coordination that the enemy could predict. Jin moved through the smoke like a ghost, not trying to see through it but listening to what it hid. Footsteps. Breathing. The slight scrape of armor on stone. He found an enemy patrol not by seeing them but by hearing the silence where sound should be. 3 clicks to warn the team. Hyan was already moving, his weapon up. He didn't wait for clear line of sight. He fired through the smoke at where logic said the enemy had to be, compensating for reduced visibility with pure instinct. 3 enemies down before they knew they were compromised. The enemy AI reacted, adapting quickly. It sent reinforcements to block the obvious routes. It predicted where the cubs would go next based on standard tactical doctrine, and the cubs went somewhere else entirely. Yuri had started with a plan. A good plan based on probability and tactical analysis. It lasted exactly 4 minutes before the situation changed. An unexpected enemy strongpoint. A blocked street. Hostages in a different location than anticipated. She threw the plan away and made a new one on the spot. Myra, we need an entrance on the north wall, 3rd floor. Make it loud. Myra didn't ask why or calculate the optimal charge placement. She just aimed at what looked like a weak structural point and fired. The explosion was bigger than necessary, attracting enemy attention from across the city, which was exactly the point, while enemies rushed toward the noise. Day brought his support craft, screening in from the opposite direction, flying so erratically that 3 enemy anti-aircraft positions missed him completely. He crashed through a window, not landed. Crashed in his craft became a mobile defensive position. The hostages were in a building designed to be a fortress. Multiple access points, all heavily defended. A direct assault would be suicide. The AI expected them to try anyway, or to wait for an opportunity. Instead, Tay led his team into the sewers below the building. It wasn't in any tactical manual. It was dirty, uncomfortable, and completely unexpected. They came up through a maintenance shaft directly into the hostage room, bypassing every defense. But the AI learned fast. As they were extracting the hostages, it redirected all forces to cut off their escape. The cubs found themselves surrounded, trapped in a plaza with enemies closing in from every direction. This was the moment most cohorts failed. Surrounded, outgunned, no clear escape route. Standard doctrine said to form a defensive perimeter and fight to the last. The cubs ran away. Not a fighting retreat. Not a tactical withdrawal. They just scattered and ran in different directions, hostages divided among them. It looked like complete panic, like a total breakdown of discipline. It was brilliant. The enemy AI, programmed to respond to threats and predict tactics, couldn't handle 6 targets running in different directions with no apparent coordination. It split its forces, trying to pursue all of them. And in doing so, it made itself vulnerable. Tay, running through an alley with 2 hostages, suddenly stopped and doubled back. The enemies chasing him ran straight into Hyan, who had circled around and was waiting in ambush. Myra led her pursuers into a building that Jin had already rigged to collapse. Yuri used her hostages as bait, positioning them where the enemy could almost reach them, then extracting them at the last second while they provided covering fire from impossible angles. It was chaos. It was improvised. It was nothing like proper military tactics. It was working. One by one, the Cubs reached their extraction points with their hostages. The enemy AI, sophisticated as it was, couldn't adapt fast enough to tactics that changed every 30 seconds. It was programmed to fight soldiers, and the Cubs were fighting like something else entirely. When the final extraction was complete and the simulation ended, there was dead silence in the observation deck. Then the scores appeared. Perfect marks. Every objective completed. Every hostage rescued. 0 casualties. Completed in record time. The silence stretched on. No cohort had achieved this. Not in 15 years. Not even close. Commander Vorak was the first to speak, his voice carrying clearly through the observation deck. Impossible. But the scores didn't lie. The simulation didn't malfunction. The Cubs had just completed the final trial flawlessly, using tactics that shouldn't work, but somehow did. In the simulation chamber, the Cubs stood together, breathing hard, looking at each other with expressions of disbelief and joy. They'd done it. Not by being perfect soldiers, but by being unpredictable survivors. By fighting the human way. The observation deck remained silent for several more seconds after the scores appeared. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Within moments, the entire deck erupted in applause and shocked conversations in a dozen different languages. The Academy commanders had to review the simulation 3 times to believe it was real. They checked for malfunctions, programming errors, anything that might explain how the Cubs had gone from total failures to perfect execution. They found nothing. The simulation had run exactly as designed. The enemy AI had functioned perfectly. The Cubs had simply beaten it using tactics. The system wasn't programmed to handle. Rin met them as they exited the simulation chamber, that familiar smirk on her face. Told you that you were ready. Tay wanted to say something profound, something that captured what he was feeling. Instead, he just laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy that his teammates echoed. For 3 months, they'd carried the weight of constant failure. That weight was finally gone. Within hours, the story spread beyond Creo 7 station. The cohort that had failed everything had just achieved perfect marks on the final trial. The human instructor who taught them to fight like prey instead of predators. The tactics that violated every principle of traditional warfare but worked anyway. Other cohorts immediately requested human instruction. Then requests came from other training stations. Within days, Rin was receiving messages from commanders across the Galactic Defense Force, all wanting to understand the Earthborn method. The Academy leadership held an emergency meeting. Some instructors were outraged, insisting that abandoning traditional doctrine was dangerous. Others were intrigued, seeing potential in this new approach. Commander Vorak, surprisingly, sided with the latter group. "I watched them," he said to the assembled commanders. "At first, I thought the human was making them worse, teaching them to be cowards, to fight without honor. But that's not what she taught them." He paused, choosing his words carefully. She taught them to think, to adapt, to survive. Our doctrine produces excellent warriors for traditional combat. But the galaxy we face now is not traditional. We need warriors who can handle anything, not just what we've prepared them for. The debate continued for days, but the results couldn't be argued with. The Cubs had proven that human tactical thinking, combined with Valhari strength and discipline, created something new. Something effective. Graduation came 2 weeks later. The Cubs stood with other cohorts who had completed their training, but there was a difference now. Other recruits looked at them with respect instead of pity. Instructors nodded to them in the corridors. Their story had become legend. The graduation ceremony was formal, traditional. Each cohort received their assignments. Most were sent to standard defensive positions or patrol duties. Good assignments, but nothing special. When the Cubs' names were called, Commander Varak himself stepped forward to announce their assignment. Cohort 47 Delta, known as the Cubs, will be assigned to Special Operations Unit 7. They will handle situations that require non-standard tactical approaches. Special Operations. It was one of the most prestigious assignments available. Murmurs went through the assembled graduates. The cohort that everyone had expected to wash out was being sent to the elite units. After the ceremony, other graduates approached the Cubs, asking questions. How did they do it? What was the human method? Could they teach it? Tay found himself trying to explain something he still didn't fully understand himself. It's not about learning specific tactics. It's about learning to think differently, to question rules instead of just following them, to adapt when things go wrong instead of freezing. But he knew that didn't capture it entirely. What Rin had taught them went deeper than tactics. She changed how they saw warfare itself. Rin found them later that evening, as they were packing their belongings for transfer to their new unit. She looked proud, though she tried to hide it behind her usual casual attitude. Special Operations, she said, nodding approvingly. You earned it. We couldn't have done it without you, Yuri said. You saved us. We were going to be sent home in disgrace. Rin shook her head. I didn't save you. You saved yourselves. I just showed you a different way to think. You're the ones who had the courage to unlearn everything you've been taught and try something completely different. That takes strength. Myra clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. Will you teach other cohorts now? The Earthborn method? Already started, Rin admitted. I have 3 new cohorts requesting training. The Academy is creating a program based on what we did. Though I hate that they're calling it a method. Makes it sound rigid, like another doctrine to follow. The whole point is to not have a rigid method. Then what would you call it? Jin asked. Rin thought for a moment. Adaptive thinking. Creative problem solving. Survival mindset. The human approach to warfare isn't about specific tactics. It's about being willing to try anything, use everything, and never assume there's only one way to win. She smiled. Humans didn't conquer Earth because we were the strongest. We didn't even try to be the strongest. We just found ways to win anyway. They spoke up, his voice curious. Is it true what they say about human military history? That your species fought wars where both sides had weapons that could destroy your entire world, but you never used them? True, Rin confirmed. We called it mutually assured destruction. Both sides knew that if they started an all-out war, everyone would lose. So we found other ways to compete. Proxy conflicts, economic pressure, intelligence operations. We got creative because the alternative was extinction. That's insane, Hyan said. That's humanity, Rin replied with a laugh. We're the species that looked at being weaker than everything else and decided it just meant we had to be smarter. We turned disadvantages into advantages, made allies out of unlikely partners, won battles we had no business winning. She looked at each of them. And now you can do the same. You have Velhari strength, but you also have human adaptability. That makes you dangerous in the best possible way. Before they left for their new assignment, the Cubs requested one final training session with Rin. She agreed, though she insisted it wasn't really a training session. "You don't need more training," she said as they gathered in the now familiar Training Hall 7. "You just need to remember what you learned. So instead of drills, let's talk." They sat in their informal circle, the way they had during those intense 2 weeks of training. Rin pulled out her ever-present coffee and settled in. "What's the most important thing you learned?" she asked. "To improvise," Tay said immediately. "To not be locked into a plan when the situation changes. To use everything available," Myra added. "Not just weapons, but environments, psychology, timing. To think like prey and predator at the same time," Jin said. "To hide and hunt. To run and ambush." Yuri was quiet for a moment, then spoke. "You taught us that there's no honor in dying gloriously if you could have survived by fighting smartly. That protecting people is more important than following tradition. And that perfect form doesn't matter if you miss the shot." Hyan added with what might have been Velhari humor. They finished. "You taught us that being unpredictable is a weapon all by itself." Rin nodded, looking satisfied. "Good, you got it. But there's one more thing I want you to remember, and this is the most important lesson of all." She leaned forward. "Never stop learning. Never assume you know everything. The moment you think you've mastered warfare is the moment you become predictable again. Stay curious. Stay adaptable. Keep looking for new ways to solve old problems. Like humans do," Tay said. "Like the best warriors do," Rin corrected. "This isn't about being human or Velhari or any other species. It's about being a survivor. About being someone who protects others not because of doctrine, but because you're smart enough, adaptable enough, and creative enough to find a way. That's what makes a true warrior." They talked long into the station's night cycle, sharing stories and ideas. Rin told them about human military history, about impossible battles won through clever thinking. The Cubs shared Velhari legends, seeing them now through new eyes, understanding how their ancestors had been adaptable too. Before doctrine became rigid, when they finally said goodbye, it felt less like an ending and more like a beginning. The Cubs went on to their special operations assignment, where their unique combination of traditional strength and adaptive tactics made them legendary. They completed missions that other units considered impossible. They rescued hostages from situations that seemed hopeless. They defeated enemies that outnumbered them dramatically. Other Velhari began requesting training in the human style. Other species too. The concept spread through the Galactic Defense Force like fire, not replacing traditional doctrine, but supplementing it, giving warriors tools they'd never had before. The Academy added a new inscription to its main hall, attributed to the Earthborn instructor who changed everything. Doctrine is what you learn. Victory is what you improvise. Years later, military historians would debate whether the Cubs' success was due to human tactical thinking or simply to having an instructor who saw potential where others saw failure. But those who knew the truth understood it was both. Rin didn't just teach them tactics. She taught them to see themselves differently, to value adaptation over perfection,